I like to pay tribute to the most beautiful Elvis Presley bootleg there ever was. This is called Behind Closed Doors, and it's a 4 LP set of all unreleased material. This one was released in 1979, and it was produced by Paul Dowling and Sam Theaker. And in this clip I would like to talk a little about the history behind it, and the history that it created, and also my connection to it. And I've taken material from the Bootleg Elvis book, Jailhouse Rock from 1983, and from Sam's memoirs, and the fact that I've been a fan of Elvis Presley for the last 30 years at least, and I've read a lot and I listened to a lot of music, and also from Ernst Jorgensen's legendary A Life in Music book from 1998, which is a milestone as it discusses Elvis Presley's recorded legacy in detail, and this is recommended to everyone and anyone interested in popular music. Like I said, I want to discuss it, so I'll take a little context. 1979, Elvis Presley had been gone for 2 years, as he sadly passed away in the summer of 1977, and in the aftermath of his passing, I'm not so sure that the RCA record label handled the legacy so well there in the years after his passing. We can take a look at what RCA Records released around the time of 1978-79 to get a fuller picture, because there's been some criticism leveled against the RCA. So in February 1978, RCA in USA released He Walks Beside Me, which was a collection of sacred songs, and not so earth-shattering, but it included at least 2 unreleased songs, or unreleased versions of The Impossible Dream from Vegas 1972, and also a different take of If I Can Dream from 1968 from the TV special. So that was quite a good release. Also in early 1978, RCA Canada released a Canadian tribute, and RCA America licensed this release and re-released it in the States. And this was a collection of songs that had a connection to Canada and Canadian writers and artists. And if we take a look at side B there, we have Snowbird, which was a hit by Anne Murray in the late 1960s, and Elvis covered it in the summer of 1970. So overall a nice album. Unreleased press conference from the Vancouver tour in 1957. Nothing else that was unreleased on that one. This one in July of 1978 has received a lot of criticism from fans, but it was aimed for children and for grown-ups too. It says it's called Elvis Sings for Children and Grown-ups Too, and it was a collection of children's songs that Elvis Presley recorded. Did nothing for the musical heritage of Elvis Presley, I'm sure, and it's been criticized a lot. Also in July of 1978, Mahalo from Elvis was released, and at least one side of this album featured unreleased material. After the Aloha from Hawaii concert in January 1973, RCA needed more material, so after the show, Elvis Presley went back to the stage with his band and recorded 5 additional songs to be included in the US screening of the show in April 73. And this made up side 1, whereas side 2 didn't include anything new and was just a collection of random movie songs. So I can't see the connection between side 1 and side 2, and that makes this album a so-so. And it's also received some criticism for not being so creative. In November 1978, on the other hand, the 3rd installment in the A Legendary Performers series was released. And as we all know, this series featured or focused on previously unreleased material. And it was a beautiful album, both graphically and musically. And it featured nice previously unreleased recordings like Danny from King Creole 1958, Fame and Fortune from 1960 from the comeback there after his army discharge, and also some Vegas, or at least one Vegas recording there in 1970. This one was a keeper, and there's a connection to Paul and Sam's bootlegs, because if it hadn't been for Paul and Sam, I'm not so sure that RCA would have realized the value of unreleased material. And by 1979, Paul and Sam had released a handful of great albums. All of their releases were splendid, excellent, and I'm sure this inspired RCA to focus on unreleased recordings, because their archive was very big at the time. In February 1979, Our Memories of Elvis was released, and it featured undubbed songs from the 1970s. They also had a sequel to that in November 1979. Nothing astonishing on those two releases, but the material was varied and quite good. So that was what RCA Records released after Elvis Presley's passing. And in 1979, this one came out, as I said, and it created a stir among fans and journalists and anyone interested in music. According to Sam, 10,000 of these were made, and the story behind the acquisition of the material is fascinating, to say the least. According to Sam, Paul, who was one of the greatest, if not the greatest, Elvis Presley record collector in the world in the 1970s, had acquired a big collection of unreleased acetates and tapes. And also Sam on the West Coast had tracked down several unreleased Elvis Presley recordings. In the late 1960s, Radio Recorders, which was a studio that was located in Hollywood on Santa Monica Boulevard, this was the place where Elvis Presley recorded most of his early 1960s soundtrack recordings. And Thorne Noger, the owner of Radio Recorders, he had found another facility, so they were about to move, and Thorne didn't want to take the tapes with, a lot of tapes there. He didn't want to take all the tapes with him, so he had contacted the record companies of the artists that he had recorded to pick up the tapes, and not everyone came there and picked it up, so there were several hundreds tape left there, and they decided to split it between the engineers. So the story goes that around 40 or 50 tapes of Elvis Presley, the size of 10.5 inch, I'll show one box of these. There's the size of it, that's the standard recording tape back in the 1960s, in the early 1960s. These were 1/4 inch width and 10.5 inch size. If you play these on the standard 15 inches per second speed, they contain like 45 minutes of music. So 40 tapes would make 30 hours of unreleased Elvis Presley recordings, and that's what Sam and Paul located there, because they managed to track down the engineers in that had worked for Radio Recorders, and they bought all those tapes for the astonishing sum of $20,000. And you have to remember that this was a duo working. This was not a record company that had financial backing. These were two creative fans, two wonderful creative fans that took a risk, in releasing these records, and also in buying the material. So we owe them everything, we fans. We put them at the top, where they belong. We put Paul and Sam on a pedestal. So in 1979 this one was released, and by the material that they had acquired, and graphically it's amazing. If we take a look at for this one they wanted like a door theme, and they found photos with doors. On the back is a picture of Elvis from the Girl Happy movie, 1964, MGM, and it had Elvis Presley locked up there for breaking a law in Fort Lauderdale for not dating enough chicks, I don't know, but the photo was great. And the inclusion of unreleased recordings from Wild in the Country, Blue Hawaii, Kid Galahad, Paradise Wine Style, and so forth, studio recordings, Nashville. I mean, this was excellent, and this was a dream come true for all fans. And the labels were also very creative. According to Sam, they copied like a German label there, and it's so professional that this could be mistaken for legal issues. So this is a tribute to everyone involved. And in 1979, when this was released, it inspired RCA, in my words. Because in 1980, the following year, it would mark the 25th anniversary of Elvis Presley's contract with RCA Records. So to mark this, to commemorate this, the fact that Elvis Presley signed with RCA Victor in November 1955, RCA in early 1980 released this big box set here called Elvis Aaron Presley. It's a 8 LP set with at least 7 of those albums contained previously unreleased recordings at the time. And it was a fantastic set, but also received some criticism for some of those records were warped, or they could have included a lot of other material as well. But all in all, it was a great release. But you have to be aware and keep in mind that this was from the official record company, and they were backed financially with a lot of funding and everything. Whereas the duo here, Paul and Sam, they worked on their own when they released this one. And in my opinion, Behind Closed Doors inspired the big LP set from 1980. And I just love it. And I return to it very often. I listen to it. The sound quality is amazing. According to Sam, their engineer is a guy named Larry. He worked at a place called MCA Whitney, and he worked wonders with those tapes that Paul and Sam bought, and the sound quality is so amazing on these and all of their releases, better than any bootleg later on. If I'm about to recommend something that could be linked to Behind Closed Doors that's available today, we turn to Follow That Dream Records. And I'd say that Wild in the Country, release from 2008, would be a contender, because it features unreleased material from Wild in the Country, which was also featured on Behind Closed Doors. A year later, in 2009, FTD focused on the Blue Hawaii sessions, and they did a 2 CD set, and this was another winner. Sound quality was exceptional. It was mastered by Vic Annesini, and this was very good. But it's also connected to Behind Closed Doors, because they started it like 30 years before. And last year, in 2018, FTD took a different approach, and this is a real winner. They released the complete